back. Bettrmma is back. The UFC has been very, very kind to Bettrmma fans. They have packed the last pay-per-view full of personality. Not just banger fights, but some of the most lovable and likable fighter personalities are on UFC 310. Naming them off the top, Bryce Mitchell, Nate Landwehr, and Joshua Van. These are three thug nasty dudes that are going to show up on Saturday night and give us our money's worth. So let's dive right into the card because I know you guys come here for the picks and the predictions. We are going to start it off with the main event. Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. Now, if you're not familiar, Kai Asakura is a former two-time risen flyweight division champion. He is coming over and making his UFC debut, and they are giving him the toughest test. The current reigning champion, Alexandre Pantoja, who I believe is on a 6-fight win streak right now. He is going up Kai Asakura is going to get the hardest fight of his life. That's for damn sure. Kai Asakura throws some very, very big, heavy shots when it comes to his boxing. He likes to throw some knees up the middle, and he doesn't have much of a kicking threat in terms of a knockout kick, but he does use them to keep range with his leg kicks. I want to make this very clear. Kai Asakura throws some very, very hard strikes, and he could very likely rock Alexandre Pantoja, and there's a slim chance that he's able to knock Alexandre Pantoja out. As we've seen in the Steve Erceg fight, Alexandre Pantoja's biggest hole is his boxing defense, but one thing that you can say about Alexandre Pantoja is that he has a granite chin. We've seen Alexandre Pantoja eat big shots and walk right through them like it's nothing. So, do I think Kai Asakura could get Alexandre on wobbly legs? Yes. So, if you're going to sprinkle some money on Kai Asakura winning by knockout, I can't blame you for it, because if there's one way that Kai Asakura is going to win, that will be the way that he's going to do it. On the flip side, there are multiple ways in which Alexandre Pantoja could finish this fight. Alexandre Pantoja could look to stand with Kai Asakura on the feet, and Kai Asakura's big flaw in his own striking is the fact that he leaves his chin very, very wide open when he is striking, and Alexandre loves to throw combinations of hooks, of tight hooks in the pocket, and I could very likely see one of those cracking Kai Asakura. So how I see this fight going is Alexandre and Kai Asakura are going to play the striking game a bit on the feet, and once Kai Asakura commits to his bigger strikes, I believe Alexandre Pantoja will opt for his takedowns, and he will begin to out-grapple Kai Asakura and look for a submission. I know that there's a lot of people who have seen a video of Kai Asakura sparring with Merab Dvalishvili, and he was able to defend the takedowns of Merab very well. I do not think that Alexandre Pantoja is going to grapple the same way as Merab. Alexandre really, really likes to use his momentum against his opponents when it comes to blitzing them and then pushing through with a double leg. And I think Kai Asakura, in one way or another, is going to find himself backed up against the fence and dealing with Alexandre Pantoja getting his hooks in, whether it's on his back or on his legs. So Alexandre Pantoja could win this fight either through a grappling-based decision, or he could potentially submit Kai Asakura early on in the fight. Alexandre Pantoja is also very close training partners with Kyoji Horiguchi, and Kyoji Horiguchi has beaten Kai Asakura in Rizin, and I think Alexandre Pantoja is a level above Kyoji Horiguchi when it comes to both his grappling and his striking and his chin. So I think in all areas, Kai Asakura is going to be fighting the best fighter he's ever faced. As long as the chin of Alexandre Pantoja keeps up, Alexandre Pantoja wins this fight, because Kai Asakura does not have good striking defense, and we've never seen him up against a grappler as good as Alexandre Pantoja. So I'm going to go with Alexandre Pantoja. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, the people's main event, Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat Rakhmonov is an aura merchant. He truly is an aura merchant. People are acting like he has been beating former world champions. People are acting like Shavkat has such a better resume than Ian Gary, even though their last 3 opponents, both of them fought Jeff Neal and Neil Magny. These guys are fighting pretty much the same guys. But because Shavkat Rakhmonov has 18 wins and 18 finishes, people want to believe that he is like the next whatever, Habib, Conor, whatever, John Jones, you know, these guys really think that Shavkat is that guy. He's him. Now, I think that Shavkat is obviously a very good fighter, but what we've seen in also his Jeff Neal fight was an ability to get cracked by big shots, and his lack of head movement comes to bite him in the ass sometimes. And we've seen him set up with big shots on the regional scene, which really got him on wobbly legs. I think the major advantage that Ian Gary has here in terms of the striking, it has to be the speed. Rakhmonov, I think, is more of a thudding, clubbing puncher, so I think his shots will hurt Gary more. But in terms of who is going to be putting on the volume and who is going to be making a difference on the judges' scorecards, I think it will be Ian Gary solidly through the first 3 rounds of the fight. Shavkat Rakhmonov is a walk you down, stalk you down type of guy, and I feel like that style in some sense plays very, very well to Ian Gary in a fist fight. I know there's a lot of rumors about what the sparring sessions were like when both of them were at Killcliff FC, but what we've learned about Ian Gary in the octagon is that he is one of the highest level strikers when it comes to managing his range and the distance at where the fight takes place. I think he is going to jab and leg kick Shavkat for a large majority of the first 3 rounds, and I think Shavkat, if he was smart, he would go to close the distance. But I think he's going to play the kickboxing with Ian Gary for those first 3 rounds, and then once his coaches realize that he's behind, Ian Gary is going to face a make or break moment. In the 4th and 5th rounds, Shavkat is going to come at him with everything that he's got. He's going to put on all of the pressure, and he's going to get all up in his face. Ian Gary really needs to show here that he has the skills to pay the bills. When it comes to a high-level finisher like Shavkat Rakhmonov, and he is continuing to put himself in harm's way for the finish, he is going to get done bad by somebody as high skill level as Ian Gary. Ian Gary stays calm in the octagon. He is not going to get overwhelmed by this pressure. It's not going to make him do out of character things and get out of his stance. Ian Gary is going to stay in his range, and he is going to be able to counter Shavkat as he comes in. Now, will Shavkat be able to get the takedowns? That really is the question. He got, I believe, 1 of 5 takedowns against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And I think wholeheartedly that Ian Gary has a lot more grappling tricks up his pocket than Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is. As we know, he's been training with the guys in Shoot the Box, you know, Charles Oliveira included. So whether it comes to the wrestling or whether it comes to switches and reversals or submissions, Ian Gary is going to pose a much more dynamic threat on the ground than certainly a lot of Shavkat's past opponents. So I think people are going to see a very, very competitive fight, and I see Ian Gary getting the decision. Mainly those first 3 rounds are going to be crucial to his win. If either one of these guys gets a knockout, I think it could be contender for knockout of the year. Moving on to the feature fight, Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Alexander Volkov is in a very, very interesting position in this fight because it's almost a career-defining fight. Ciryl Gane absolutely picked apart Alexander Volkov in their first fight, which was a 5-round main event, I believe at one of the UFC Paris events. And Gane essentially showed that he is a level above Alexander Volkov when it comes to the striking. Now, Alexander Volkov is a traditional striker. He does not like to grapple his opponents. He really likes to use his height and reach. My biggest question for Alexander Volkov going into this fight is, will Alexander Volkov go for the takedown? Will he go for the takedown? He was able to stand on the feet with Ciryl Gane for 25 minutes and learn for 25 minutes that he is not able to get a step ahead of this guy. If he goes into this fight with the expectation that he could fight the same exact game plan in a 3-round fight now, mind you, that would be absolutely insane. For him to try the same thing and expect a different outcome would be insane. So, I think Alexander Volkov, in this career-defining fight, needs to go for the takedowns against Ciryl Gane. Come in there with a wrestling-based game plan. Now, do I think this will happen? No. Alexander Volkov, if he was smart, he would go out there and do his best Dagestani wrestler impression for 15 minutes. Because if anything, we've seen the main weakness in Ciryl Gane's game is simply the fact that his wrestling isn't on point. I think Volkov is going to play in the striking game, and I think Ciryl Gane is going to be able to deter any takedowns when it comes to Volkov's half-assed attempts, which he may try. Volkov has not shown an ability to wrestle against strikers in his past, so I think it's going to be a pretty easy Ciryl Gane decision over the 3 rounds. Moving on down the card to Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. I'm going to keep this one very simple because there's really not much to talk about. Bryce Mitchell is a very, very talented grappler at the 145-pound division, and Kron Gracie is a very talented jiu-jitsu player. Does Kron Gracie have any wrestling? No. Does Kron Gracie have any boxing or striking? No. Does Kron Gracie have any striking defense at least and good footwork so he could evade some punches? No. Kron Gracie willfully puts himself in danger on the feet, and he looks to essentially play guard off of his back, and that is his MO. Bryce Mitchell actually has some decent underrated hands. If you watch the Ilia Topuria fight again, I know he got absolutely demolished and creamed by Ilia Topuria, but Ilia Topuria, as we know, is one of, if not the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world right now, and Bryce Mitchell was actually able to use some decent head movement to avoid some punches early on in the fight and throw a decent counter straight right hand every once in a while. So Bryce Mitchell actually does have some striking. As we've seen, he's knocked down guys like Edson Barboza. So I think if anything, Bryce Mitchell might use this as an opportunity to just show his hands for 15 minutes. And we could get a really, really fun bar-style fight out of this because if anything, we know Kron Gracie doesn't have much skill, but he actually does show up to fight, and he will walk forward and he will bring the fight. That is one thing you cannot hold against him, is that he will bring the fight and make it entertaining for the fans in one degree or another. You will be talking about Kron Gracie after he fights on Saturday night. I can guarantee you that. But Bryce Mitchell, if he wants to take this to the ground and start out wrestling Kron and just start ground and pounding him, I could see Bryce Mitchell having success in that as well. He is the far better wrestler out of the two of them. The only thing Bryce has to worry about is just a submission from Kron Gracie off of his back. But Bryce Mitchell, as we know, is a very seasoned grappler and submission artist, so I'm sure he'll be able to defend against whatever Kron Gracie is going to throw his way. I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell getting a dominant decision, and there's a slight chance that he might be able to get a late TKO in the 2nd or 3rd round. Now we are moving on down the card to Nate Landwehr versus Doohoo Choi, the Korean Superboy. I'm a fan of both of these guys. I picked Doohoo Choi in his comeback fight against Bill Algeo. Doohoo Choi can crack on the feet. I mean, this guy throws big shots, and he could knock out anybody if he lands on you clean. Nate Landwehr, on the other hand, has almost a mythical ability to recover. It's funny how the only guy to knock him out in the UFC was Herbert Burns, which makes absolutely no sense. But as we've seen in Nate Landwehr's fight with David Onama and Jamal Emmers, somehow he could get cracked by big punches on the feet, and he can even get knocked down, but he'll have an amazing ability to recover, and he uses his cardio to his advantage. Nate Landwehr is a cardio beast, and that is a major advantage that he has in this fight against Doohoo Choi. The main question and determining factor of this fight is, will Nate Landwehr's chin hold up against Doohoo Choi? Because Nate Landwehr does not necessarily have age on his side, and we've seen him get knocked down and put in a lot of wars. There's going to be a point in time in Nate Landwehr's career where we are going to see that chin starting to give. Do I think it starts on Saturday night? No, I do not. I think Nate Landwehr is a mythical fighter. He is, I forgot who said this, but I think it captures Nate Landwehr perfectly. He's like a budget Conor McGregor. This guy is going to show up, drop fire lines at the press conference, drop a killer post-fight speech, and he's going to make the fight entertaining as hell. He's going to keep it on the feet. He's going to give the people what they love. And at the end of the day, you're getting plenty of bang for your buck whenever you're watching a Nate Landwehr fight. I'm a big fan of Doo-Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, but the Korean Superboy doesn't even necessarily have age on his side either, and he definitely has a cardio disadvantage. So as long as Nate Landwehr keeps his head on a swivel, keeps that head movement going, doesn't get hit with anything too clean, I think he'll get away with a savage, classic Nate Landwehr decision, if not a TKO. Moving on down the card to Anthony Smith versus Dominic Reyes. These are two former title contenders. As we know, Dominic Reyes gave John Jones arguably his hardest fight that he has ever faced in the octagon. There are many people who still say that Dominic Reyes won that fight. Neither here nor there. Dominic Reyes is on his comeback arc. Dominic Reyes took a lot of time off. As we know, he suffered many knockout losses. I believe it was 3 or 4 after he lost to John Jones. But we saw luck turn Dominic's way in his fight against Dustin Jacoby. Many people, such as myself, were picking Dustin Jacoby in that fight. And Dominic Reyes was one of the biggest stories coming out of that weekend for what a phenomenal performance he put on against Dustin. When Dominic Reyes is patient and he lets the counter punches come to him, he is deadly with that straight left hand. And as we know, he is a very strong athlete. He does have a very good kick to the body. He has a sneaky, strong high kick as well. Dominic Reyes has a decent striking arsenal. And when he's able to put it all together, be patient and let the fight come to him, Dominic Reyes is a problem. Now, as we've seen, Anthony Smith was just outstruck on the feet by grappling champion Roman Dolidze. I think Dominic Reyes is going to keep this fight standing, and I don't think Anthony Smith is really going to have the courage to just walk down and march down Dominic Reyes and force a grappling exchange. Anthony Smith may attempt to do that because he doesn't have this. Fuck this. Dominic Reyes is going to get the fucking knockout, alright? Dominic Reyes is going to knock out Anthony Smith, and if he doesn't knock out Anthony Smith, he's going to make Anthony Smith look like he doesn't belong in there. You know, Anthony Smith has not looked good in a lot of his past fights. You know, unless Dominic Reyes hands him a finish like Vitor Petrino, there's no way that Dominic Reyes fucks this up. Dominic Reyes is far too motivated coming into this fight. Anthony Smith is in between his fighting career and his commentating career. Dominic Reyes is going to make a splash, and he's going to bring himself back into the contender conversation at 205. Now, moving on down the card to Vicente Luque versus Themba Gorimbo. I'm a fan of Vicente Luque's fighting style. He seems like a cool guy too. But Vicente Luque is not in his fighting prime whatsoever. If you don't know, he also has some sort of brain bleeding issue, some sort of brain hemorrhaging, and I can't even believe that he's still professionally fighting, knowing that he has some sort of brain injury like that. I'm just wishing that nothing serious happens to Vicente Luque in terms of his health in this fight. Themba Gorimbo has a very simple game plan in his fights. He is going to stick at range with a very basic jab and some low leg kicks. Then he is going to look to out-grapple you and lay on top of you. The same game plan will apply to this fight against Vicente Luque, and I think after people like Joaquin Buckley, Bilal Muhammad have essentially been able to write the playbook on how to absolutely dominate Vicente Luque, Themba Gorimbo is going to have all the tools already in his skill set to imply this sort of game plan, and Themba is going to be very, very comfortable fighting Vicente Luque. Vicente Luque, I think, is tired of defending takedowns. He wants to stand on the pocket and the feet, and the only way that Themba Gorimbo loses this fight is if he obliges that for Vicente Luque and he's able to get hit with a clean hook across the chin. But I'm going to go with Themba Gorimbo getting a dominant 3-round decision. Moving on down the card too. Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. The whole argument this week has been which guy is going to out-wrestle the other to a decision, essentially. I don't think there's many people that really expect this fight to be finished, but I think what is the big determining factor for me in this fight is that Movsar Evloev, I think, is a little bit too big for Aljamain Sterling. I think Movsar Evloev is stronger than Aljamain Sterling in a lot of these wrestling positions, and I don't think Aljamain Sterling is necessarily going to be able to dominate Movsar Evloev like some of these smaller guys like Peter Yan. I also think when it comes to closing the distance, Movsar Evloev is going to have a solid jab, which is going to help pepper Aljamain and make it harder for him to close the distance throughout the fight if he's having to avoid a jab and come in at different angles. Movsar Evloev, I think, is going to control how this fight goes. I think he's going to win a classic Movsar Evloev decision. Moving on down the card to Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle. I'm very confident that Bryan Battle is going to dominate Randy Brown, in all honesty. I think Randy Brown really favors himself against shorter opponents where he can pick them apart at range and start to throw those long shots from a solid boxing range where they're not able to reach him. Bryan Battle is not that fighter. Bryan Battle is a big dude for 170, and Bryan Battle in his own right has a long reach which can compete with Randy Brown's, and he has some very solid, strong, straight punches, which I think Randy Brown is not going to like. And if either of them is going to out-wrestle the other, I think Bryan Battle is going to do that. I think Bryan Battle is going to get a dominant 3-round decision here, if not a TKO in the first 2 rounds. Moving on the card to Chris Weidman versus Eric Anders. Now Chris Weidman is not very motivated against Eric Anders, and I think that's a bad position to be in because Eric Anders is at a point in his career where he is looking to get a name like Chris Weidman on his resume. If there's going to be somebody to get up Eric Anders in the morning to make him really, really motivated to be the best Eric Anders he could be, it's going to be a big name like Chris Weidman, and I think that's going to surprise Chris Weidman in the octagon. I don't think it's very smart of him to go into the cage with this sort of attitude that he's just going to run over this guy when he is over 40 years old and he is no longer in his prime. So Eric Anders, I think, is going to fight tooth and nail to win a close split decision here. Moving on down the card to Cody Durden versus Joshua Van. Now, as you guys know, I am a Joshua Van fan. I love Joshua Van. He is that dude. Against Cody Durden, I think Joshua Van's key to victory here is making Cody Durden miss. Cody Durden, as we know, is a very good wrestler at the flyweight division, so he's going to be shooting at Joshua Van's legs. Joshua Van has some great takedown defense, and he's pretty good in the wrestling scrambles as well. Joshua Van should do what he does on the feet, which is pile on volume. I hear a lot of people talking about Joshua Van's power going into this fight, and I see Joshua Van more as a volume puncher. You know, he throws a lot of volume in there, and the shots accumulatively start to crack these guys. But Joshua Van is not somebody who's necessarily throwing with 100%, and I think that really plays into his favor, especially as the fight goes on. So if Joshua Van is able to dip his head out of the way of Cody Durden's big overhand rights, and he's able to avoid getting hit by any crazy counters of Cody Durden, then all he has to worry about is the wrestling. But again, this is a very tough fight for Joshua Van. You know, he's going up against a very tough test in Cody Durden, but I'm wishing Joshua Van nothing but the best, and I'm saying Joshua Van is going to get a split decision, 29-28. Moving on down the card to Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. Now, this fight is very interesting because Michael Chiesa definitely has the bigger name. Some would argue that Michael Chiesa has been more successful in the UFC. But if you look at Max Griffin's record, he's beaten some guys that he wasn't supposed to beat. You know, a veteran Carlos Condit, Max Griffin beat him. Mike Perry, Max Griffin beat him. Max Griffin goes into a lot of fights as the underdog because he doesn't necessarily have a particular strength that you can point to. But one thing that you can say about Max Griffin is that he's a hell of an athlete. He's got some power in his shots on the feet. And when he's going up against a guy like Michael Chiesa, who outwardly says that he neglects his striking and does not train his striking, and that's clear in Michael Chiesa's fighting style, Max Griffin only really has to worry about takedown defense and being able to get up from his feet once he does get taken down. So I'm going to go with Max Griffin getting a second round TKO. I don't think Michael Chiesa is necessarily very motivated for this fight. I think he is just looking to get a quick paycheck for holiday season. And at the end of the day, he's another one of these guys who is halfway got a commentating career and sometimes fights in the UFC. So I'm going to go with Max Griffin getting a unanimous decision or a TKO in the second round. Moving on down to Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper. Not much to be said for this fight. Chase Hooper already submitted Clay Guida in a grappling match that they had. And as we know, Clay Guida, his whole game plan is to maybe throw a jab and a tight hook in the pocket, and then he's going to shoot for your legs for a takedown. Chase Hooper, I'm sure, is going to invite the takedown of Clay Guida, and Chase Hooper, I think, is going to go to work off of his back when it comes to submissions. Chase Hooper is a very good submission artist. As we have seen, he has submitted a lot of guys in the UFC, and if Claudio Puelles can submit Clay Guida, I think Chase Hooper could do the same. Chase Hooper is a very long, lanky guy, and I think that is a very tough thing for Clay Guida to deal with when that guy is such a talented grappler and submission artist like Chase Hooper. So I think Chase Hooper is going to get a first-round submission here. And we're finishing off with the card opener, Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Lucas Brzeski. I'm going to go with Kennedy Nzechukwu here. Kennedy Nzechukwu looked good and in good shape at heavyweight for his heavyweight debut against Chris Barnett just a few months ago. He looks in good shape. There's nothing special about Lucas Brzeski's game. Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to keep the range here. He's going to pick Brzeski apart at distance, and he is going to hit Brzeski with elbows in the pocket once they get into a clinch situation. So Kennedy Nzechukwu is most likely going to get a first-round knockout or a dominant decision. But that'll be it. Thank you guys so much for watching or listening. Peace.